What did Athena, patron goddess of Athens, have? What did Jesus of Nazareth have more of as a child than all the elders at temple? And what did Odin Allfather sacrifice an eye to obtain? Welcome to Excavating Wisdom, Volume 1. All right, so wisdom. Let's learn some stuff from some Google stuff. So wisdom. It's an Old English word for wisdom. It means knowledge, learning, experience. From whiz, which you can look up as wise. We're going to be looking up that in a bit here. A common Germanic compound of Old Saxon. Nope, we don't care about any of that stuff. Wisdom teeth. We don't care about wisdom teeth either. Although the fun fact about wisdom teeth is they actually come in at the age when you're supposed to have some bit of wisdom all piled up. Usually between 17 and 25, which sounds about right. Your brain's done developing at about 25, give or take, for your standard deviation, but that makes sense. You're supposed to have accrued some form of introductory wisdom by about the age 25, which is handy because that's when you're supposed to start making babies if you're going to be a baby maker. Oh, can't say bacon babies. I know. All right, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to be looking at wisdom. It's a noun, an Old English wisdom for knowledge, learning, and experience. Well, it's all based on the word wise. So let's actually just jump over to the word wise for a second and see what that comes. Okay, here we got a bunch more stuff here. Okay, so Old English wiz. I don't know if I'm saying that right, just W-I-S. Learned, sagacious, like a sage. Cunning, sane. Sane's important. If you're feeling like your world's a little crazy, maybe a little wisdom would help because it's right there in the root word. Prudent, discreet, experienced, having the power of discerning and judging rightly. That is an interesting one. Having the power of discerning and judging rightly. Well, it kind of hinges on the word right, doesn't it? But I suppose if we're going to have somebody who thinks, who we think of as a wise person, as a judge, that actually makes some sense because we want wise judges, not just smart judges, but wise judges would go a long way too. The Old English wise, or whiz, W-I-S, learned, cunning, sane would be a good one, prudent, discreet. Are you making notes as we go here? Fucking A, I got a guy who's going to make some notes for me. This is awesome. Okay, so it's Old English wise, W-I-S, learned, cunning, sane, prudent. Prudent's an interesting choice. Discreet. Yeah, there's definitely some wisdom and discretion. That makes sense. Experienced. I think we could have all guessed that one. And then this one I think is really interesting. Having the power of discerning and judging rightly. Interesting. It kind of ties into the idea of the behind the phrase the right thing to do, knowing what the right thing to do is, judging what the right thing is. Well, I guess that depends on the values that you put behind it. We're going to be talking a lot about values down the road. That's fine. We'll get to that later. But having the power of discerning and judging rightly. Interesting. All right, so there's wisdom. That's where it's from. Actually, the stuff I think we're going to be wanting to talk about down the road. Learned, cunning, sane, prudent, discreet, experienced, and having the power of discerning and judging rightly. Well, we're going to have to look up a little bit more about this rightly because that really is dependent on the value structure that we're talking about. Because what's rightly to one might not be right to the other. So that's going to be interesting. We're going to look at that a little bit closer down the road. But that's wise. And then wise, of course, leads to wisdom, knowledge, learning, experience, blah, blah, blah. We already talked about that earlier. Interesting. Good. All right. So there's wisdom. Let's do a little bit right off of the good old Wikipedia. We're gonna talk about this for a second here because Wikipedia, for all its flaws, is very, very interesting when it comes to compiling what people think. Wisdom, sapience, sagacity. Is the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense. Common sense is a very troubling term. We'll get to that one later. And insight. When we do the gamer stuff later, we're gonna be tying this back to insight as well. Actually, wisdom is associated with attributes such as unbiased judgment, compassion, experiential self-knowledge. That's interesting. Self-transcendence and non-attachment, and virtues such as ethics and benevolence. Well, there you go. That answers it right there. If we want our leaders, our politicians, our CEOs, the people that our influencers, to all you YouTubers out there. Yeah, if you want them to be ethical, then it ties right back to wisdom. Interesting. Wisdom's been defined in many ways, including several distinct approaches to assess the characteristics attributed to wisdom. Well, that's fun. But we're going to look at that from the gamer side of things, actually, because that's much more my forte. So we're going to start with that. Actually, I'm going to do a quick little bit here on explaining why I want to use nerd stuff for this. All right, so wisdom is one of the 6 ability scores in Dungeons and Dragons, which is probably the oldest running RPG that I know of anyway. There's probably older, but it's the longest running one that I know of. You got what? Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, which is what we're doing here to talk about, and charisma. Charisma is an interesting one too, but wisdom's the one we're going to be talking about. And for all its gray area kind of thinking, wisdom is still on the list. That's interesting. It's definitely still there. Actually, let's take a quick walk down that road for a second. Ability scores. Your 6 ability scores provide quick descriptions for. Oh no, I'm going to back up a second. The reason I want to use role playing games as a simplified version of how this works is, one, nerds can be pretty smart, and 2, they love to argue about piddly little details about everything. I know, I'm a nerd, level 5 nerd, so that's fine. But wisdom's still on the list, and it covers a wide range of interesting abilities. And the reason I wanted to look at it from the gamer's perspective is what you get is what role-playing games do is they take a complex situation like a combat scenario, a bar fight, an interaction with a king or somebody who's setting you up on a quest or a guild member or whatever. It takes some of these complex interactions and it simplifies them. It makes them low resolution versions of themselves so that you can actually play it out as a game and it doesn't take forever. So a lot of the things that we take for granted in our day to day that we're using our muscles, we're using our balance, our health, our whatever, or intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. What games do is they kind of boil that down and say, okay, well, what is this actually good for? Okay, strength, attack, push, carry, dexterity. Let me scroll down quite a bit here. Intelligence, wisdom. Okay, so in Dungeons and Dragons, or a basic role-play game, wisdom reflects how attuned you are to the world around you and represents perceptiveness and intuition. Well, that's neat. It's actually kind of neat. You hear gamers talking quite a bit about how perception is the most important skill. It's the most regularly rolled skill check. And there it's right there. Wisdom backs it up. Perceptiveness and intuition. Neat. All right. So wisdom checks. Wisdom check might reflect an effort to read body language, understand someone's feelings, notice things about the environment, or care for an injured person. And then it gets into animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival skills reflect aptitude in certain kinds of wisdom checks. Well, that's pretty clear. So let's just talk about some of those just a little bit more in detail here. Animal handling is a wisdom thing in games. When there is any question about whether you can calm down a domesticated animal, keep them out from getting spooked, or intuit an animal's intentions, then you might have to make a wisdom animal handling check. Well, that's kind of makes sense because you have to have some experience, you have to have some intuition, you have to have some perception to work with animals. That makes perfect sense. Insight, your wisdom insight check decides whether you can determine the true intentions of a creature. Actually, the true intentions thing's interesting because we're going to be coming back to the true and how true has changed to mean more like fact these days, whereas in its more original term, or original usage, true is more like my true love. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You can't have your fact love. It doesn't carry over. Or if a husband remained true to his wife. Or if that guy's a true blue friend. We're going to be circling back to true later on. Not today, different time. But later on, we're going to be circling back to true. But let's go back here. Your wisdom insight check decides whether you can determine the true intentions of a creature, such as when searching out a lie or predicting someone's next move. Doing so involves gleaning clues from body language, speech habits, and changes in mannerisms. Well, that's important. So if I sit here like this, I look all defensive about something. But if I sit here with my shoulders back, I'm sitting up straight. It Somebody could use their insight based on their wisdom to intuit that I'm open and honest and all those fun things. Wisdom medicine checks let you try to stabilize a dying companion or diagnose an illness. Yeah, okay. I would put that more under intelligence, but I guess no. Actually, St. John's is quite clear on this one. When they're training somebody up to be a first aider, for example, they have to you have to do it. You can't just know about how to do it. You have to do it. So maybe wisdom includes the actual doing of. That's interesting. Over just intelligence, which is just the knowing of. Interesting. I guess that would factor in the experience stuff that we saw earlier in the definition. It was using your experience and common sense and all that stuff. And here's the one that I really wanted to think about a little bit. How perception is based on your wisdom, which is of course makes intuitive sense. Ha! I intuited. Ha! Your wisdom perception check lets you spot, hear, and otherwise detect the presence of something. It measures your general awareness of your surroundings and the keenness of your senses. Makes sense? For example, you might try to hear a conversation through a closed door, eavesdrop under an open window, or hear monsters moving stealthily in the forest. You might try to spot things that are obscured or easy to miss. Whether they are orcs lying in ambush on a road, thugs hiding in the shadows, or a candlelight under a closed secret door, etc., etc. So perception is just your ability to use your senses to go, son of a bitch, something's there. They also got survival under here. No, I bet you that plays back into the same experience. Knowing how to make a lean-to does not help you if you've never actually done one before. It might get you started, like the intelligence side of it, right? The knowing how and the doing of. Not gonna. There's gonna be some overlap. Oh, actually, that might be a good time to point out intelligence and wisdom. Definitely a lot of overlap. Just like fact and truth, there's definitely some overlap. But I think wisdom is going to play more into the experience side of things, the doing of side of things. Which actually brings up an interesting point. One thing I noticed before was the religion checks. And yes, we'll be talking about some religious things along the way, but it's an intelligence-based check. And I would have imagined there would be more of an overlap between religion and wisdom than there would have been between religion and intelligence. But here they've got it under intelligence. It says your intelligence religion check measures your ability to recall lore about deities, rites and prayers, religious hierarchies, holy symbols, and the practice of secret cults, blah blah blah. But so from that side of it, it's more about the knowing. Sure. I bet you they could have done something interesting if they had made religion more of a wisdom check. Because then we could have tied in the experience side of it as well. But maybe that's why they didn't actually. Maybe they just maybe they made it an intelligence to remove the experience side of it, so that there wasn't any overlap with actual religious experience, which do happen. But to avoid any of the complications that might come from real world events overlapping with game stuff, and could hurt some people's feelings, offend some people. Maybe that's why they just ended up sticking it under intelligence and making it an academic thing. Fair enough. Okay, so I know that was a much longer ramble about Dungeons and Dragons than I would have imagined, but it does factor in the sense that role-playing games are a simplified version of reality. Made by fairly smart people who love to argue about everything. So by the time they actually put something as a rule, it's usually fairly well worked out. A lot of the rough edges have been worked off of it. Good. All right. And I guess the bottom line on that one is that wisdom is still one of the 6 primary ability scores in Dungeons and Dragons, which means it's a real thing. Just like strength, just like dexterity and constitution, intelligence, and charisma, wisdom is on the list. They could not simplify it any further than that. Trust me, I've worked on games like this. I've played games like this for a long, long time. You can trust me on one thing: simplified is good. Nothing kills a game like this faster than having a rule set that's so bloody complicated nobody can follow along with what's going on. So wisdom's on the list for a reason, because it does capture a whole lot of these things that you couldn't capture with the other 5. Cool. It is interesting though, this wiki page, wisdom, sapience, sagacity, or sagacity. That's probably how you say it. Is the ability to think and act. There's that act again, the doing part, using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. Well, insight overlaps with the D&D stuff. Common sense is going to be a whole conversation in of itself, but understanding and knowledge would seem more along the intelligence side of things. That's interesting. I have to look into that one a little bit more. But the experience overlaps quite nicely. I think they nailed that one. So, all right. So let's dive into a little bit of the wisdom side of things. Okay. So from a sorry, getting some pop ups here. All right. So some definitions. What do we got? Defines wisdom as capacity of judging rightly. There's that judging rightly again. Capacity of judging rightly in matters relating to life and conduct, soundness of judgment in the choices of means and ends, sometimes and less strictly sound sense, especially in practical affairs. It's the opposite of folly. Then they associate it quite quickly with knowledge, which is interesting. Ooh, and enlightenment, learning. And erudition. I don't know what that word means, actually. I have to look that one up. Charles Hayden defined wisdom as the right use of knowledge. Well, that actually makes some sense because I don't want to get too deep down to into the science and religion don't work well together side of things. I'm sure that'll come up at some point, but the right use of knowledge. Well, that makes sense because if intelligence is, and I guess the science side of things is more about answering questions of what is with measurable stuff, then maybe wisdom is where you point science. Because to the best of my knowledge anyway, science can't actually tell science where to go or what questions should be asked. Oh, right, because there's that should. Because as soon as you say should, you're out of science and you're out of intelligence. You're into wisdom. Cool. I like that. All right. The right use of knowledge. Where do we aim science? Where do we aim intelligence? Good. I like that. Okay. Well, let's see what else we got here. Mythological and philosophical perspectives. Those are going to be two very big topics that we're going to be covering in great depth later on. But let's just do a quick little note here. To Socrates and Plato, for the philosopher types out there, to Socrates and Plato, philosophy was literally the love of wisdom. Philosophia. Makes sense. The love of wisdom. Very good. One of the things we should probably talk about at some point is we're not going to be spending a lot of time, if any, talking about current events. If it's a current event in wisdom, it happened 500 years ago. Because the fun thing about wisdom is, or making decisions about that have a right or a wrong answer, as far as was it the right thing to do? I don't mean correct or incorrect. I mean, was something the right thing to do? We don't know. We don't know until way after we're cold in the ground, or hot in a fiery box, depending on which way you want to go. I want to go as a diamond. I don't know if I ever told you that one, but I want them to cremate me and compress me until it turns into a diamond. They're doing that now, but it's expensive as heck, last I saw. Mm-hmm. All right. Psychological perspectives. I don't want to get too deep into the psychology side of things just yet. Positive psychology. Here we go. Researchers in the field of positive psychology have defined wisdom as the coordination of knowledge and experience and its deliberate use to improve well-being. Good. Sounds like something we could all use a little bit more of. Under this definition, this is an interesting part. I like this. Under this definition, wisdom is further defined with the following facets. It's problem solving with self-knowledge and sustainable actions. Sustainable is an interesting use of interesting word choice in there. Contextual sincerity to the circumstances with knowledge of its negative or constraints and positive aspects. That's going to take some unpacking. Value-based consistent actions with knowledge of diversity in ethical opinions. My goodness, that's a mouthful. Tolerance towards uncertainty in life and unconditional acceptance. Interesting. And empathy with oneself to understand one's own emotions. That's getting into the mindfulness side of things. Or to be emotionally oriented. Morals, etc. And others feeling, including the ability to see oneself as part of a larger whole, but without, this is not part of what I'm reading here, but without losing oneself to the whole. Did you watch DS9? Did you still? Yeah, when Odo joins the Great Link, he does this, or before he joins the Great Link, he does this really interesting part where when he asks the other shapeshifter, he goes, well, "How many are there?" And she's like, "Well, I don't know how to answer that question." And once he understands, he says it quite nice. He's like, "Well, there's many or one. It depends on how you look at it. Because when they're joined, it's one, and when they're not joined, there's lots of them running around." So that's interesting. Religious perspectives. All right, well, let's get this out of the way right now. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is wisdom regardless of source, which means we're probably going to be delving into some religious topics. We're also going to be talking about secular stuff too. We're going to be going through Marcus Aurelius's meditations. We're going to be and frankly, I don't really care where the wisdom comes from, but I do want to look at all of it as best I can. We're probably going to find ourselves in some rabbit holes from time to time, but I'm not going to get caught up in particular geographic regions' ways of looking at things. I'm going to try and find maybe what's below it. What is deeper than local ideas? We're going to try and find something beneath it, I suppose. Okay, so we're just gonna leave off the religious side of things for now, because that's going to be a whole lot of topics. And frankly, what we're going to be looking at from the religious side of things is we're going to be looking at the documentation without the religious context. I definitely believe that there's religious experience. I got no issues with that. I've been down that road myself. Still journeying down that road. But the point is, the point of this conversation is excavating wisdom. And the simple fact is, wisdom has been compiled more effectively in religious sources than anywhere else that I know of. So we're probably going to start there. And we're going to be looking at lots of things. We're going to be looking at mythologies. We're going to be looking at religious texts. We're going to be looking at old stories and poetry. We're going to be looking at lots of things. And we're going to weigh them against what we need today. We're going to see how even the old stories turned into new stories, how the hero's journey and old Greek gods and demigods turned into today's superheroes. We're going to talk about all that. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about why we talk about them. That's the interesting part to me. All right. Today we're going to be talking about, next we're going to talk about the relevance and application of wisdom. And honestly, I think wisdom has the application side of it built right in, because of all those definitions we saw. It was about experience and acting and doing the right thing, whatever that means in that particular moment. But we're going to be looking at wisdom, or applying wisdom, by finding old wisdom, even some newer stuff. That's fine too. I'm really not picky about source. But I do think we need to find the best ideas about how to behave in this world, how to get along with each other, how to navigate our day to day, how to. I don't think old texts are going to tell us how to pay our bills, but I bet you we'll find some stuff in there that says paying your bills is a pretty good idea. Ooh, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Bam! Quote. Yeah, we couldn't get through the first episode without throwing some some religion in there. All right, that's fine. It's a good idea, regardless of source. Giving to the government what the government is owed is probably a pretty good idea. Okay, wanting to help your. Okay, one thing. Let's get into the personal side of it for a second here. Wisdom accumulates by simply. I'm sure it accumulates in lots of ways, but one of the ways that wisdom accumulates is simply wanting to pass on good advice to the next generation. I'm a perfectly limited and capable of screwing up individual. I've made lots of mistakes. I've probably made more mistakes since I sat down than I have in a while. But what we have is this ability to make mistakes and then try to learn from those mistakes. And what happens when we have children or nieces and nephews or younger cousins, whatever, and we've learned a particular lesson, we tell them. We tell them a story. We tell them a story about what we did wrong or what stupid, foolish, limited, dumb thing we did. And what we do is we pass on that information to them, that wisdom to them. And they can choose to abide by it or not. And they're going to learn their own hard lessons their own way. But one of the things that compiles wisdom is simply telling the stories about your limitations, telling the stories about your mistakes. When I was in university, I screwed up because I whatever, 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 and hopefully your kids don't make the same mistakes. They'll find new mistakes. There's always more mistakes to make than there are solutions for them. So there's no real limit on that one. But I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, the point is, if you want better for your kids or for the next generation, tell them stories about your screw ups or someone else's screw ups. And what happens is we slowly accumulate wisdom. Um, when we talk about old stories, we're gonna talk a little bit more about how once we've distilled enough similar stories, we can extract out the essence of what the point was. But we can do that with lots of things. Hell, the reason The Lion King is a movie, not the newer one, but the old cartoon one from the '90s. There's a reason it's still wildly popular. It's because it's a good story. If you tried to boil down The Lion King to a moral lesson or even just a lesson, it'd be almost impossible because you could come up with an almost endless list of information and ideas and answers to questions of how to be in the world just by watching The Lion King. It's a good hero's adventure story. We're going to be talking about adventure stories quite a bit as well. But the point is, The Lion King works because you can't distill it down to one lesson. Some other things like if you were gonna distill Spider-Man down to one thing, with great power comes great responsibility. Absolutely, perfect, makes sense. It's a great lesson, but you can distill it down to that. Whereas something like The Lion King, there's there's no real end to the lessons you could pull out of it. You could go with don't run away from your responsibilities and stand up straight and face your problems. It means don't let the bad guy make a deal with hyenas, and all the little versions of that. But all right, everybody, that's our brief introduction to wisdom. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me at excavatingwisdom.com. Hope to see you next time. Thanks.